Thank you for shopping at Super Happy Mart.
Hello, and welcome to the Guam Keto Project. I'm your host today, Ken Leon-Guerrero. And today we are going to be very, very fortunate because we have with us one of the leading pioneers in the battle against obesity and diabetes, and a warrior in the war on metabolic health, Dr. Robert Lustig. And it's timely because this week, NEWSWEEK just came out with a story. If we could get the cover up on NEWSWEEK. Toxic food, because we are what we eat. And we have been lied to by the food companies. And it's not really their fault. The food companies are in business to make money. Unfortunately for us, the way they make money is they use the most cost-effective ingredients possible. Subsidized foods, subsidized wheat, subsidized corn, subsidized sugar. Those are the only crops that the U.S. Department of Agriculture subsidizes, food crops. They also subsidize cotton. But with those crops being subsidized, the food manufacturers have latched on to those products as a way to drive down the cost of the food. And as we heard in the open, scientists have figured out how to make our food more addictive. And in the process of making it more addictive, they have made it more toxic. So in this article from NEWSWEEK magazine, I'm going to read the opening line. Being severely overweight has never been so dangerous. During the COVID pandemic, Americans who are obese without any other risk factors were hospitalized 3 times the rate of people who weren't, by some estimates. When combined with diet-related health conditions such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity raises the risk of hospitalization 6-fold and the risk of death 12-fold. These numbers have raised the stake of the nation's epidemic of diet-related diseases, commonly called lifestyle diseases. And we're going to get back to more of that right after this.
This is Wendy's new Big Bacon Cheddar. It's loaded with more of that Wendy's bacon you love and more of the cheese you've always wanted, all between 2 cheddar buns. Because Wendy's goes all out to come up with new flavors, unlike some places.
So, Wendy's put cheddar on the bun. What do we got?
Guys, sesame seeds.
Yeah.
Yes!
Okay, seeds. Yeah.
Seeds? Really? If you want a cheeseburger that's packed with flavor from bun to toasty cheddar bun, we got you with Wendy's Big Bacon Cheddar.
Thank you for shopping at Super Happy Mart.
When we get to the point where national magazines like NEWSWEEK are also commenting on how toxic our food is, it's very important and very timely that we meet today's guest, who has authored 3 books, the Fat Chance, Metabolical, and The Hacking of the American Mind. And he has over 40 years experience in healthcare and healthcare-related fields, and he joins us today. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are honored and excited to have Dr. Robert Lustig, a medical professional who has taken his 40-plus years of experience in the medical field and turned it into an advocacy with a mission to help everyone. So what I would like to do is, earlier before we started, you were sharing a story with me about how the power of sharing a story can work. And if you would be so kind to share that with with everyone here.
Well, thank you, Ken, and thank you all for tuning in and listening to this. So, as you'll hear during the course of this hour, I've been trying to do my part in fixing the chronic metabolic disease pandemic that has overtaken pretty much the entire world, and particularly America, and of course, all its associated territories, including Guam. The diseases we're talking about are type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease. These are all chronic metabolic diseases that have no cure. And the reason they have no cure is because they are all diseases of the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the little energy burning factories inside cells. And when they become dysfunctional and the cell can't make energy or dispose of energy properly, it gets sick. And these various diseases that I just mentioned are the manifestations of that. And so we have to fix the mitochondria. The problem is there's no pill.
Yeah, that's one of the big things that became apparent to me, because everyone that we listened to up to changing our lifestyle was always pushing medicine, when in reality, lifestyle changes have been so much more effective and so fast.
Indeed. And the reason is because medicines can't get to the mitochondria, but food can. The problem is real food gets to the mitochondria and fixes them. Bad food, ultra-processed food, gets to the mitochondria and poisons them. So when they say, let thy food be thy medicine, the way Hippocrates said it, Hippocrates never met McDonald's. What he really meant to say was good food is medicine, bad food needs medicine, and the medicine doesn't even work. That's what we've learned. So I wrote a book in 2013 called Fat Chance. And in that book, I laid out my thesis, which basically said, we got it wrong. We used to say, we are what we eat. And what that book said was, we are what we do with what we eat, what we metabolize. Anyway, that book did quite well, and I was very proud of it. Mm-hmm. Since then, I've actually published this book behind me called Metabolical, which actually rephrases it yet again, because I got it wrong in 2013. What I really should have said was, we are what they did with what we eat.
And I agree with you. I've read both books, and they were both incredible books, helped me change my life. My wife changed her life for the better. Metabolical, for those of you watching this is like the human body owner's manual. If you have a human body, you need to be able to operate and understand the systems of the human body as well as we do with a car. And this book, Metabolical, is just incredible because it breaks down the systems of the body and how the different things we eat affect those systems. And for that, I can't thank you enough. Because
you're most kind. You're most kind. I thank you for for that endorsement. Well, the thing that was interesting that made me smile was last year I got a phone call, cold call, from a guy in Philadelphia who was in his mid-30s. He is a CEO type, business school graduate entrepreneur, and exercised, was in reasonably good shape, and then somehow ended up in his ICU in Philadelphia in diabetic ketoacidosis with type 2 diabetes that almost killed him. And he couldn't understand why. And so in his quest to try to figure out what happened and what to do, he found my book, Fat Chance. And he said he thought it made sense. He adopted the precepts that were in that book in terms of how to fix his diet. And his diabetes reversed. It's gone, completely gone. Mm-hmm. And he said, whoa, this is pretty cool. I need to start a company to be able to do this. And that's exactly what he did. And that company is called Simplex Health. And they have partnered with insurers, and they've partnered with hospital programs to basically provide the dietary therapeutics to turn diabetes around by getting insulin down. And the fact is, they've done extraordinarily well. So he was calling me to tell me about this company and this program, which I had nothing to do with, except that I was the inception of. And I was intrigued. And so he sent me the information, and they can reverse 77% of type 2 diabetes with just food, with no medicine, and up to 80% of gestational diabetes. And I said, wow, even I didn't know it was this good. And so I've become an advisor to them, and we are, currently, seeking Series B funding to be able to promulgate this and get this national. And we actually see this as a potential roadmap to trying to help, many, many people around the country, around the world, really, fix their chronic metabolic disease. And we do it with food.
Well, I'm glad that you made that point very clear, not just here, but in all the talks you've done on YouTube and through all these other organizations, because the biggest challenge that I see facing the people of Guam here is the fact that the medical community is so wedded, and I'm talking about the community as a whole, is so wedded to ADA and the ADA guidelines. And I mean, my wife here, they put her on insulin. And when the moment they put her on insulin, her weight skyrocketed, and she went all the way up to 170 units before we made the break and focused on lifestyle and got rid of the ultra processed foods and eliminated the sugar from our diet. And then within weeks, she was able to dramatically reduce. I mean, she got off the insulin, got off chronic depression meds and statins and everything else, just by changing diet, as you have been advocating for so long, starting with eliminating sugar and processed foods. But how do we get doctors on board?
Right.
That's the big challenge there.
Well, you mentioned the American Diabetes Association, the ADA, and I want to go there for just a second, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
So the American Diabetes Association, by the way,
Wait a second, I got to change something. They have a chapter here.
Yeah, I don't belong to the American Diabetes
Okay.
Association. I actually think they're part of the problem, not part of the solution. And they always said, eat all the carbs you want, just take enough insulin to cover it. That was their response to how to, quote, manage diabetes with carb counting.
Yeah.
Well, that's how you can manage a blood glucose. That's not how you reverse a disease. In fact, they've never been able to reverse the disease, but the disease is reversible. They will tell you that type 2 diabetes is a chronic, progressive, degenerative process that has no cure. That is not correct. It can be remitted if you change your diet. But they don't tell you to change the diet. They tell you, eat all the carbs you want, just take enough insulin to cover it. When people brought up the concept of a ketogenic diet, which is an extreme low-carb diet, which suppresses insulin maximally and actually turns on a different pathway in the body via ketones, which can actually improve mitochondrial function through a chemical called sirtuins. They wanted nothing to do with it, and they said that this was perhaps the single worst diet possible. Now, I will tell you that if you go on a ketogenic diet and you fall off it, it is the single worst diet possible. So I'm not going to argue that. I mean, a poorly done ketogenic diet is really a high-fat diet with moderate carbohydrate. You want to get your insulin up. That's the worst way to do it. So they've got a point there. On the other hand, the concept that you cannot reverse your diabetes is just plain wrong. Yes, you can. The point is you have to know what you're doing, and you have to change the food. And until you change the food, basically all is lost. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm involved in advocacy. Now, I will tell you, the American Diabetes Association does not feel this way. And they have put out, guidances every year, basically, arguing against this practice. Now, in 2019, they did leave a little bit of leeway, a little bit of light let into the room, saying that at least on an acute basis, a ketogenic diet could get your blood glucose down. But that's not enough. And I will tell you, and I will read for a moment, if you give me 1 second, I'm going to read from this book, Metabolical, about a very specific run-in that I had with the American Diabetes Association. Okay, and let me tell you, okay, here it is. So I want you all to write down right now, Freakonomics, there's a war on sugar. Is it justified? This is a podcast that was done on the radio show Freakonomics in 2017.
I'll put that link in the show notes.
That would be great. April 28th, 2017. And there were 3 guests. Peggy Hamburg, who was the former head of the Food and Drug Administration, Richard Kahn, who was the former executive director of the American Diabetes Association, and me. And I want to read to you what Richard Kahn said about the cause of obesity. This is a direct quote. There's been some evidence that with the increased use of psychotropic drugs, antidepressive drugs, drugs for schizophrenia and other mental disorders, those drugs tend to promote weight gain. And when people stop smoking, that's usually been associated with weight gain. Now, many people believe that sugar consumption has been the cause of our obesity epidemic and subsequently diabetes. But I believe the evidence for this is pretty weak. Now, that came from the executive director of the American Diabetes Association.
Mm-hmm.
He actually wrote an amicus brief for the American Beverage Association against the San Francisco soda tax. Now, why would he do that?
That's a good question.
That's a really good question. So I'm going to leave it to your audience to think about that. Next time they want to invoke the ADA as being the, shall we say, the expert source of information on type 2 diabetes.
Well, that's a good lead into the next question I wanted to ask you, because one thing that you do very clearly in Metabolical and in Fat Chance and all your talks is you explain the addictive behavior and why sugar and ultra-processed foods are addictive. Specifically, the difference between pleasure and happiness, which was it just totally opened my mind and helped me break my personal addiction and my wife break her addiction once we got that concept. If you could please explain that to our audience.
Absolutely. Thank you. So this is a different book that I wrote. It was called The Hacking of the American Mind. I do not have it here on my...
I've got links I'll put up to everybody.
Okay, great. So, there's this phenomenon. It's a positive emotion. It's called pleasure. And then there's this other positive emotion called happiness. Now, if you go to the dictionary and you look up the definition of pleasure and the definition of happiness, they are almost indistinguishable. In fact, Often where you look up happiness, it says pleasure and vice versa. So the two definitions have sort of melded together. This was not always the case. In fact, there are 7 differences between pleasure and happiness. 7. And here they are. Number 1, pleasure is short-lived, like a meal. Happiness is long-lived, like a lifetime. 2, pleasure is visceral. You feel it in your body. Happiness is ethereal. You feel it above the neck. 3, pleasure is taking, like from a casino. Happiness is giving, like to Habitat for Humanity. 4, pleasure is experienced alone. Happiness is experienced usually in social groups, like community, a synagogue or a church. Number 5, pleasure can be achieved with substances like cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, sugar. Happiness cannot be achieved with substances. Number 6, the extremes of pleasure, whether it be substances or behaviors. So the substances I just mentioned, or behaviors like shopping, gambling, internet gaming, social media, pornography. In the extreme, all lead to addiction. There's an aholic after every one of those. Shopaholic, sexaholic, chocoholic, alcoholic. But there's no such thing as being addicted to too much happiness. And finally, number 7, the most important one, pleasure is dopamine and happiness is serotonin. 2 different neurotransmitters, 2 different areas of the brain, 2 different sets of receptors, 2 different regulatory mechanisms, 2 different mechanisms of action. These are not the same. Now, why do we care? They both feel good. People say, like, so what? Well, it actually matters. And here's the reason it matters. Dopamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It excites the next neuron. Now, neurons like to be excited. That's why they have receptors in the first place. But neurons like to be tickled, not bludgeoned. Chronic overstimulation of any neuron will lead to neuronal cell death. Neurons can't keep it up for any length of time. And so neurons have a self-defense mechanism. They have a plan B. When they get overstimulated, what they do is they downregulate the number of receptors. So it's less likely that a dopamine molecule will be able to find a receptor to bind to. And what that does is that reduces the gain, that reduces the amplitude, that reduces the response. And over the long period of time, what that means is the more dopamine, the fewer receptors, the less effect. This is the law of diminishing returns, also known as tolerance. The more pleasure you seek, the less benefit you will get from it. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, serotonin, on the other hand, is not excitatory, it's inhibitory. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Now, do you need to downregulate the receptor when it's inhibitory? Nothing's going to die. So serotonin does not downregulate its own receptor. But there's one thing that downregulates serotonin: dopamine. So the more pleasure you seek, the more unhappy you get.
So that would kind of explain why people who are addicted to things need more and more
to get less and less.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they become decidedly unhappy. And that's what we're seeing out of the food industry. Because what they've done is they've made the food so pleasurable because they've put an addictive substance in the food. It's called sugar. And of course, caffeine too.
Well, that explains why when we were looking at trying to eat less, it's almost impossible.
Indeed.
You know, I mean, then we have at the beginning of the show, I sent you the little promo talking where scientists are talking about how they work to make the food addictive. I mean, all the food companies have scientists who do nothing but try to make their food more addictive.
Absolutely. Michael Moss, in his book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us, talks about the bliss point. Well, that's the point of maximum dopamine release. That is the bliss point. And so they have flavorists who specifically work on this. Point is, they know what they're doing. And that's why, with the advent of ultra-processed food starting in the mid-1960s to 1970s, food intake has gone up and up and up and up. Point is, so is our prevalence of chronic metabolic disease at the same time. And the reason is not because of calories. So this is the myth, is that it is calories that causes the problem. And the reason we know it's a myth is twofold. The first is, it is true that 80% of obese people are metabolically ill. That is true. I don't argue that. But that means that 20% of obese people are not. They're metabolically healthy. They will live a completely normal life, die at a completely normal age, not cost the taxpayer a dime. They're just fat. They have normal length telomeres, the edges of the chromosomes that fray and ultimately cause cell death and ultimately human death. These people are not causing the problem. 20% of obese people are metabolically healthy. Conversely, 40% of the normal weight population have the exact same diseases as do the obese. Normal weight people get type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia too. Now, it's true they get it at a lower rate. They get it at 40% versus 80%. So obesity is a risk factor. I don't argue that. That's true.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I'm not belittling the importance of obesity. It's still important. But if normal weight people get it too, then how can it be about obesity? How can it be about behavior? This actually looks more like exposure. This looks more like cholera or influenza or tuberculosis or COVID-19 for that matter.
Yeah, and you know, the point you made right there is so critical here on Guam because we have a large Asian influence. So we have a lot of people here who are diabetic or pre-diabetic, have the full panel of metabolic diseases, but they're normal weight.
Exactly. So what we've learned, and this is really important for the doctors out there, what we've learned is that there is not one fat depot. There are three fat depots, and they contribute differentially to chronic disease. So let's take those three fat depots separately. The first one, the big one, subcutaneous or big butt fat, as in, does this bathing suit make me look fat? That one, okay? And by the way, never answer that question.
Good advice.
Good advice. Pro tip, never answer that question. All right. Subcutaneous fat is actually protective against metabolic disease. Now, the amount of subcutaneous fat you have to gain before you start seeing signs of chronic disease is dependent on race. Asians can afford the least amount. African Americans can afford the most amount. Caucasians are in the middle. No one understands why this is, probably genetic. But the bottom line is, on average, you have to gain about 10 kilos, 22 pounds of subcutaneous fat before you will start seeing chronic metabolic disease precursors in the bloodstream or out of, in individual organs. Okay. Now let's take the second fat depot, the visceral fat, the big belly fat. Now, that fat is not due to diet. That fat is not even due to weight. In fact, that fat is due to cortisol. That fat is due to stress. And the reason we know this is because if you take people who have endogenous depression, they're losing weight. They lose weight. But if you stick them in an MRI scanner, they actually have gained visceral fat. So that visceral fat is metabolically active fat that is laid down by stress and cortisol and is not related to calories or weight. Now, it is true that that metabolically active visceral fat is a major player in terms of chronic metabolic disease. No argument there. But how much fat do you have to gain before you start seeing that, those effects on chronic metabolic disease? The answer is about 2 to 3 kilos, so about 5 to 6 pounds. So 22 pounds of subcutaneous fat before you see a problem, 6 pounds of visceral fat before you see a problem. And you may or may not be able to see those 6 pounds on a scale.
Yeah.
And finally, the third fat depot, liver fat. And that is the worst fat because that's affecting the liver directly. And when the liver goes south, that's when chronic metabolic disease really, really gears up. And how much fat does your liver have to store before it gets sick? And the answer is a half a pound.
Wow.
Of liver fat. So 22 pounds of butt fat equals 6 pounds of belly fat equals a half a pound of liver fat. Now that half a pound of liver fat won't show up on a scale, but it's there. And this is the reason that 45% of all Americans now have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They didn't get this from drinking alcohol. They got it from consuming sugar, because that's what happens to sugar in the liver. It gets turned into fat.
In the beginning of your career, you started a practice as a pediatric endocrinologist. How has your experience with children shaped who you are today?
Well, so I became a pediatrician to get away from chronic disease. And that's all I do. I started out taking care of short kids, and then the short kids got fat on me. I mean, this happened on my watch. And the thing is, everyone wants to blame the victim. Everyone wants to blame the perpetrator. If you are fat, it's because you ate too much and exercised too little. It's your fault because of this concept of energy balance, right? That's what all the doctors and the nutritionists and the NIH and the Institute of Medicine and the Surgeon General and the White House and Congress and the food industry all say it's about energy balance. So it's got to be increased intake or decreased expenditure, gluttony and sloth. Therefore, if you're fat, it's your fault because it's a behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, diet and exercise. Therefore, any calorie can be part of a balanced diet. But really what it is don't pick on our calories, go pick on somebody else's calories. And it all comes from this notion that calories are fungible, that any calorie is like any other calorie. All right? It turns out that is completely, totally, 100% provably false. That is just garbage. And we have the data, and we've had the data for decades. It has just been ignored because it didn't fit the narrative. Okay? Example, almonds. You eat 160 calories in almonds. How many of those calories do you absorb?
I don't know.
About 130. So you ate 160, you absorbed 130. Where'd the other 30 go?
I don't know. I'm not going to guess.
The fiber in the almonds, soluble and insoluble, formed a gel on the inside of the duodenum. The cellulose, the stringy stuff in celery, that's in almonds, that makes almonds, hard,
Mm-hmm.
okay, set up a lattice work on the inside of the duodenum. The pectins, the inulin, okay, soluble fiber, plug the holes in that lattice work. Together, they form a gel. You can actually see it on electron microscopy, a whitish gel that serves as a secondary barrier that prevents early absorption of the various foodstuffs in the almonds so that they don't get absorbed early and they don't go straight to the liver where they would get converted to fat, thus protecting the liver. Well, if you're not absorbing them early, then they go further down the intestine where the bacteria are, the microbiome. And so the microbiome chews up those extra 30 calories for their own purposes. So you are feeding the gut. You are protecting the liver and feeding the gut because you ate those 160 calories as almonds, as opposed to 160 calories of, say, soft drink. So even though you consumed them, even though they passed your lips, you didn't get them. Your bacteria did. You fed your bacteria. And this has now been proven by a study that Kevin Hall did. And by the way, I would refer everybody to a magazine article that came out today in the United States. So that would be yesterday for you. Okay, NEWSWEEK. It's the front cover article of NEWSWEEK. The title of the article is Toxic Food. So if you put that into your URL, NEWSWEEK toxic food, put it in the show notes, okay, it will come up, and they interview about 9 nutritional scientists from around the country, myself included, but some other big names as well. And Kevin Hall did this study in 2019, where he took people and he admitted them to the NIH's clinical research unit, where they have room calorimeters. So you live inside the room and it measures your energy expenditure by looking at how much oxygen you utilize and how much carbon dioxide you blow off, and adjusting for weight. They can actually measure your body's energy expenditure. And what they did was they did it in a randomized crossover fashion. They fed these people the exact same number of calories, the same amount of carbohydrate, the same amount of protein, the same amount of fat, the same amount of sugar, the same amount of everything, except for a 2-week period, they did it as ultra-processed food, i.e. Twinkies, and for the other 2 weeks, they did it as unprocessed food, all right, real food. Mm-hmm. And what they found was that when they were eating the ultra-processed food 2 weeks, they burned less, ate more, and gained weight compared to when they were on the real food diet. And the real reason is because the sugar in the food, in the ultra-processed food, was actually inhibiting mitochondrial function. And of course, the sugar was also stimulating appetite because of the addiction component that we talked about. So in fact, ultra-processed food is the problem. Yeah. Ultra-processed food is the driver. And Guam, unfortunately, like most island nations or island territories, have to import their food, which means that it's going to be processed or it won't get there. So this is a problem not just for Guam. This is a problem for Bermuda. This is a problem for Reunion Island. This is a problem for virtually any offshore place. This is not, and of course it's true for all of Micronesia for this exact same reason, because basically they're all eating the same thing. So this is not just your problem. This is everyone's problem. The point is that it is very fixable, but you have to fix the food supply.
And we also have to break the addiction, because when you drive by the dialysis centers, and we have 6 dialysis centers on an island of a little over 150,000 people. And when you drive past them and you see the people sitting there drinking sodas and eating chips while they're waiting for their turn on the machines, and they refuse to change, it shows how strong the addiction is, which brings me to the children as our hope.
That's right.
Your experiences working with children.
So what I realized was, in 2001, a paper came out saying that we had an epidemic of obese 6-month-olds. They don't diet or exercise. In fact, since then, another paper in 2006 came out that showed that we have an epidemic of obese newborns.
How does
Now,
that happen?
how do you explain that? This cannot be about behavior.
No, it can't.
This has to do with physiology. This has to do with biology. In fact, what this has to do with is insulin. Insulin is the energy storage hormone. Insulin shunts energy to fat, and it does it in adults, it does it in children, and it does it in fetuses. So when that pregnant mother, drinks that orange juice that she was told to drink by her obstetrician, what she has done is she has provided a substrate that her own body can't use, goes through the placenta to the fetus, and then the fetus has to up the insulin in order to clear it. And where does it clear it? It clears it into that fetus's newly formed fat cells to drive their production and their storage. And this is how you end up with an epidemic of obese newborns. Because the obstetricians and gynecologists tell the mother that they need to drink fruit juice to get vitamin C. That's how.
Oh, I mean, if they start out as obese newborns, what is their prognosis for life going from that point?
The answer is it's playing out now. They're going to be in your emergency room, taking up space on the gurney that you need, okay, because they just had their heart attack, waiting for their next stroke and amputation from their type 2 diabetes. That's what's happening.
Well, this brings me back to when we look at the human impacts, not just with the children, but with the young adults now. I believe in one of your talks, you talk about how the first generation that's going to have a shorter life expectancy and poor quality health has been born. Well,
we're seeing it. In fact, for the last 4 years, American life expectancy has gone down in 4 years in a row. First time that's ever happened. First time even 1 year, but 4 years in a row. Okay, and the fact is we're spending more money. So if you actually look at the life expectancy versus healthcare, it's actually going in the opposite direction. So, the bottom line is the more we spend on healthcare, the worse we get. And there's a reason for that, is because these diseases can't be fixed with medicine. Not possible.
So when we talk to our policymakers, and I will be talking to policymakers, what do we tell a policymaker how they, at their level, can help, if nothing else, reduce the burden on taxpayers? Because the majority of the people here on Guam don't have insurance, so that's going to fall on public health, which is taxpayer supported. How do we tell policymakers what they can do to help fix this?
Well, you can't fix healthcare until you fix health. You can't fix health until you fix diet. And you can't fix diet until you know what the hell is wrong. And for the last 50 years, we've been barking up the wrong tree, because we said it was calories and we said it was saturated fat, neither of which are true. This is the big lie. Washington has its own big lie. This is the big lie of science, that it's about calories and saturated fat. In fact, saturated fat is cardiovascularly neutral, and dairy saturated fat compared to animal red meat saturated fat is actually protective against diabetes and heart disease. And the reason is because dairy saturated fat is not like red meat saturated fat. Dairy saturated fat is odd chain fatty acids with a different phospholipid signature, which has been shown to be protective against diabetes. compared to red meat saturated fat, which is even chain fatty acids without that phospholipid signature, which is cardiovascularly neutral. So I'm not telling you that red meat saturated fat is good, but if you think red meat saturated fat is the problem, okay, basically you've missed the boat, because the real problem is the refined carbohydrate and sugar, because that's what makes the insulin go up. And the goal of the exercise is get the insulin down. Now, how do you get insulin down? Don't let it go up. Well, only two things that make it go up: refined carbohydrate and sugar. Well, where's the refined carbohydrate and sugar in our diet? How about everywhere?
Yeah.
But the thing is that the refined carbohydrate and sugar, corn, wheat, soy, sugar, are all subsidized. They're all subsidized. So people ask me all the time, like, if you had a magic wand and you could like do one thing, and could you make this all go away with one change? And I go, yeah, I can. Get rid of food subsidies. This is where the policymakers have to come in, because food subsidies don't even make sense. There's no economist on the planet that believes in food subsidies, because they distort the market. Let the market work. Right? The fact of the matter is, we've been subsidizing all the things that kill us. Now, I know why. It goes all the way back to 1933. Goes back to the original Farm Bill. Goes back to the Depression and the Dust Bowl. Because we had a destitute population in the American Southwest, from Kansas west all the way to Arizona and California. Right? And all the food was in the Northeast, and we had people dying in the Southwest, and we had to get the food from the Northeast to the Southwest. The problem was, if you just put the food on railroad cars, it would have gone rancid by the time it got there.
Mm-hmm.
So the food had to be processed. The fiber had to be stripped. The flour had to be milled in order to be able to put into 10-pound bags and transported across the country, so that it would arrive, and then it would be baked up, on site. And hey, we saved an entire, American population by doing that, because that policy made sense.
Yeah.
And the point is, you had to subsidize those crops in order to make it worthwhile for the producers, for the growers, to do that. And that actually made sense all the way through World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But after World War II, it stopped making sense. Okay. Like, for instance, do you really need Spam?
Well, here on the island, we do. It's like one of the top 10 products.
I know. I got it.
Yeah. But do we really need soda? That's
No.
even a more interesting question. I remember when schools did not have soda machines. If we wanted to take a soda to school, we had to wrap it in paper towels and then wrap it in aluminum foil so it would still be cool at lunch. But
Right.
now they're ubiquitous.
Of course.
All the schools.
Well, this is the point. And the point is that after World War II, there was no reason for this policy, but the food producers would say, hey, we can make money at this.
Yeah.
And so we doubled down. And that's when, things started to explode. And then in 1971, Richard Nixon, carrying on Johnson's war on poverty, realized that fluctuating food prices caused political unrest. And he had a lot of political unrest to deal with.
Yeah.
So he told his agriculture secretary, Earl Rusty Butz, love that name, to make food cheap. And so Butz went to Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, to the heartland, and he said three things: row to row, furrow to furrow, get bigger, get out. And so what the US did was, we went to monoculture to increase yield, to increase productivity. Now, the problem is, when you do that, okay, when you take the cows and you move them off the farm in Iowa and move them to the CAFO, the concentrated animal feeding operation in Kansas, what are they going to eat? On the farm, they ate the clover and the alfalfa, legumes, okay, which actually have omega-3s, are anti-inflammatory and, immunosuppressive, which are good and keeps your insulin down. Okay, what do they eat on the CAFO? They eat corn.
Yeah.
Right. And so what happens? The corn has all these branched chain amino acids and all this glucose, causes big insulin rise. And so these animals get fatter faster. In fact, that's the marbling you see in American meat. That's intramyocellular lipid. That's metabolic syndrome. Those cows are metabolically ill the same way we are. It's just that we kill them before they get sick, before they drop. And the thing is that these animals are lying in their own manure because there's no, it's not going into the ground because they're on the CAFO, the crops are in Iowa.
Yeah.
So they have to give these animals antibiotics to keep them alive so that they don't die from gastrointestinal diseases, from dysentery. All right. So that puts antibiotics throughout the meat, which then, of course, we eat, and that, changes our intestinal microbiome and makes us sicker. And in the meantime, back in Iowa, okay, there's no fertilizer because the manure is in Kansas.
Yeah.
And they're not going to truck the manure all the way from Kansas back to Iowa. So what do? They spray it with petroleum products. They spray it with ammonium nitrate. Okay. And what does that do? It provides the nitrogen, to fix the plant and get it to grow. That's true. Yes, it does that. But then the nitrogen runoff poisons the water tables and ends up in the Mississippi River. And that's why you have a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And it turns out nitrous oxide has 9 times the heat trapping capacity of methane and lasts 25 times as long in the atmosphere. Methane, it has a residence time of 9 years. Nitrous oxide has a residence time of 114 years. So we're basically making the climate worse. So the antibiotics are basically killing our insides, and the nitrous oxide is killing our outsides, all in the name of ultra-processed food.
Well, one of the big challenges that we face here locally as a result of the overconsumption of ultra-processed foods is that the declining health of our population is draining our healthcare system, which is requiring more and more tax dollars to be diverted away from other issues to healthcare. We're also seeing the explosion of metabolic syndrome and disease rates. So it's more of a drain on the economy and individually, because we're looking at medical poverty that is rising at astronomical rates, which is draining the quality of life. So what can we as individuals, you and I talked earlier about the ripple effect in our first phone call, and that's what we have done. You had no idea who you were going to impact when you did that sugar, the Bitter Truth video, but it has changed lives around the world. And through our own advocacy here, my wife and I sharing the stories of our experiences, we've inspired other people. But the way I look at this is we have to do this at the individual level and at the starting with the family. But you had a really good point about the 4 C's as a reinforcement tool for success.
So thank you. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, one of the problems is if you think that food is happiness, you're lost. You're lost. Okay, food is food, and happiness is happiness. Love is love, happiness is happiness, and food is food. But if you confuse pleasure with happiness, there's no question sugar gives you dopamine, and dopamine gives you reward. I don't argue that. And, people think, oh, that sounds so egregious. That sounds so awful. All right, so here's a good way to put it. I'm for dessert. For dessert. I am not for dessert for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. So let's take a look for a moment at the National School Breakfast Program, which you have in Guam, because, you know, we have it here, you have it there. Okay, same National School Breakfast Program. What is a breakfast on the National School Breakfast Program? It is a bowl of Fruit Loops and a glass of orange juice. That's what it is. How many grams of sugar is a bowl of orange juice, a bowl of Fruit Loops and a glass of orange juice? 41. That's 41 grams of sugar. The American Heart Association says that for children, the upper limit of sugar consumption for the entire day should be 3 grams. Sorry, I take it back, not 3 grams, 3 teaspoons, 12 grams. 12 grams, 3 teaspoons for the entire day. Breakfast, the National School Breakfast Program is 41 grams. That's more than triple the allotment, and it's just breakfast. And we have shown that fructose, the sweet molecule in sugar, is a mitochondrial toxin. It poisons those mitochondria. It poisons 3 separate enzymes that make those mitochondria work. It poisons AMP kinase, which is the fuel gauge on the liver cell. It inhibits the functioning of ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, which is the first enzyme to start chewing up the fatty acids through fatty acid oxidation. And finally, it inhibits CPT1, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1, which is the enzyme that regenerates carnitine, which is the shuttle mechanism for getting the fatty acids into the mitochondria in the first place. In other words, fructose, and therefore sugar, is a chronic, dose-dependent liver mitochondrial toxin. And we are giving kids in Guam triple their allotment at breakfast alone, never mind the rest of the day. So what the hell do you think's going to happen?
Right now, 30+% of our children are morbidly obese.
And that's why.
Yeah.
Because they are consuming a mitochondrial toxin with each meal. So I'm for dessert, and make it a good one. But I am not for dessert for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks.
So in order for us to reverse this trend, we at the family level have to take control of our food and start weaning ourselves or breaking our addiction to the sugar and the ultra-processed items.
Well, the problem is that the sugar's been added to the ultra-processed food. And by the way, the fiber's been stripped away at the same time to make that absorption, more rapid, and therefore your liver even more a target. The bottom line is the food supply has to change. Mm-hmm. Now, the food supply is not going to change unless you make it so. Can you make your food supply on Guam change? And the answer is yes, you can. But it's going to require a very large effort, and it's going to require everyone being on board together. And it's going to require the policymakers for Guam actually likely going to Washington to argue for this, because you are dependent to some extent on what the American government will supply you with.
That is so true. And following that thought, we as individuals, because of the work people like you've been doing here on Guam, there's been a growing awareness to the point where we're starting to see supermarkets and stores bringing in what they think is better quality products. But when you look at a keto cookie and it's got 38 grams in one cookie, and there's 2 cookies into a pack, we still have a long way to go on that education process.
Yeah, and keto cookies are really not keto.
Yeah, that goes back to that we as individuals have to learn how to determine what is real food, which brings me to your other, the thing that I'm so excited about is the eatreal.org nonprofit that you're been working hard with, and the success you've had in Tennessee and with school systems.
Yes.
I'd like to talk about that because that shows a groundswell movement, a grassroots movement that is driving companies to try to create better products and policymakers to try to do the right things, but it's going to be a long road.
It is a long road. So, the fact is, why is the food in schools so awful? And the answer is because the food is procured by the government, through suppliers like Cisco or McDonald's, et cetera. And it's delivered to the schools each day. And there's no food preparation on site. Now, once upon a time, when I was a kid, we had the lunch ladies.
Yeah, gray hair.
The little blue, right, in the little, hair nets and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they would prepare the food at the school. And what happened to them? In 1971, Congress passed something called Resolution 242, which basically said that the cafeterias in each school had to make book. They basically had to become self-sufficient. They couldn't be a loss leader for the school. And so what that did was that sent all these schools scrambling to figure out how they were going to ultimately make food cheap enough to be able to balance their budget. In stepped Cisco and all these other purveyors, and they said, we'll provide the food for the schools. And guess what? You get an added benefit. You get to repurpose your food preparation facilities. You get to take the infrastructure in the school that was devoted to food prep, and you can turn it into classrooms. And that's what they did. And that was their plan all along. Because now, since these schools do not have food preparation facilities, now they're hostage to the food industry for the entire existence of the school. So now the food, the school systems are all addicted to the food suppliers. And the question is, how do you get real food into schools when there's no food preparation facility? So our nonprofit called Eat Real, you can find it online at eatreal.org, has been working with specific school districts around the country. We started with the Mount Diablo Unified School District here in the Bay Area, and we've expanded now to 300 school districts. And what we do is we have a completely new food business model, which actually is cheaper. And so we started in Mount Diablo with a very enterprising and forward-thinking food services director named Dominic Mackey. And what he did was he purchased a dilapidated factory and turned it into a food prep facility, centralized food prep facility for the entire district. And that food prep facility makes 27,000 meals a day and farms it out to the 27,000 students in the district at 27 schools. And each day they do the same. And because they buy in bulk, they actually save money. Because it's centralized, they actually save money. And they're able to provide healthy food made on spec and on site each day. And we have gotten rid of 270,000 pounds of sugar from the Mount Diablo Unified School District in 1 year.
Well, that has got to be an amazing impact, because if those kids are eating 2 meals a day with a dramatically reduced sugar load, that has got to improve their school performance as well as their health.
And it does. And that's the point. And so we are expanding this, and we would be very happy to work offshore. Obviously we need, funds and, the right infrastructure ourselves to be able to do that. But that is the goal. And ultimately the goal is to make this international. Okay, having each school make its own food was sort of, redundant and inefficient to start with. But to have a centralized food prep facility for the entire district actually makes a lot of sense. And you can buy a cost, and you can control the production process. You can actually choose what goes into the food, and you can make it much, much healthier. And that's what we're doing.
I like also the fact that you've extended this effort into commercial enterprises, because I was looking at the list of partners you have in Tennessee, all the different restaurants that have come on board, and small food manufacturers that are working towards your real seal.
We are trying. We are actually trying to develop a food classification system called the metabolic food classification system, and have food procurers and restaurants, be able to strive for this classification. So it basically is, it'd be like a LEED certification for buildings. You see it and that a certain criteria has been set and met in order to be able to get that seal of approval. And we think that that is a way of engendering trust amongst the populace to be able to do that. So yes, we're working wholeheartedly to make that happen.
Yeah, I could see where, especially in a place like Guam, where food is such a huge part of our culture and eating out is such a huge part of our culture, for people who have metabolic illnesses or are trying to improve their health, reduce their weight, knowing where they could go and have very healthy options. And that's where I see that seal being very important, because as it is now, we have a grading system. And people actually do look at the A's, the B's, the C's that are posted on the front door. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a neat reel?
Well, so the A's and the B's and the C's have to do with cleanliness. They don't necessarily have to do with metabolic health. Ultimately, the goal is to improve the metabolic health of the food, not just the sanitary conditions. So we have we have a ways to go, because people still think it's about nutrition. It's not. It's about metabolic health.
Yes, yes.
It's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food. And you can't know that by reading a food label.
And I agree with you. That's one of the things that I've become aware of since following you, is the lack of information that we have. I mean, the food labels have helped us to a degree, to the point where we have some companies that do break out the added sugar. Unfortunately, not everybody does. And at last count, we are now up to 93 names of sugar, because it seems like as soon as
262 names of sugar.
And I thought I was smart just knowing most of the 93 names.
262 names for sugar. You can find them all at a website, the Hypoglycemia Support Foundation. You can put that in the show notes.
That's going in the show notes as well.
Hypoglycemia Support Foundation, hypoglycemia.org.
Well, I know that you are getting time crunched right here because of your previous commitments. My wife would like to ask you a question, if you wouldn't mind.
Of course, Ken. Please.
Let me turn the mic over to her. Let's see, we have a real production system in place. There you go.
No worse than mine.
Mic on.
She's strapping into the mic now.
Would help if they turned it the right way. Here we go. Hi again, Dr. Busted.
My pleasure, Kim. How can I help?
Well, I have a question. It's kind of off the track here just a little bit, but I think it's pertinent for probably some people here on Guam. I have had really good success with dietary and lifestyle change. I've been able to take 8 months ago, my fasting insulin was 16. Last week, when I got my latest lab results, it was 9.2.
Excellent.
So I'm thrilled about that. But I have been a type 2 diabetic for over 24 years. And my issue is, even with my extreme discipline, I mean, I'm not, I don't believe in this falling off the wagon thing. There is no wagon. kind of thing. So right from the get-go, when I started 21 months ago, cut sugar, cut refined carbohydrates, got the carbs down below 20. And yet here I am today, my fasting insulin can still be as high as almost 200. Is that a result? I mean, my fasting glucose, excuse me. Is that a result of beta cell burnout? Because it's sure not coming from the food I eat.
Yeah, that's a good question, Kim. And without knowing more about your specific situation and without looking at other lab tests, I couldn't answer it for sure.
Right.
What I can say is Peter Butler at University of Southern California, who's a diabetes beta cell expert in terms of beta cell ontogeny and life, suggests that after a certain point, those beta cells, the cells that ultimately become beta cells, may ultimately hyalinize and be not functional and not able to regenerate functioning insulin secreting cells anymore. Usually it takes about 7 years of full-blown diabetes to get there. You were diabetic for 24 years. So it's possible that you don't have the beta cell reserve that you would need to fully, completely reverse your diabetes because it went on for so long. Now, I don't know that. We would have to do some fancy tests to try to figure out whether or not you did have that beta cell reserve or not. I'm not privy to that information. You probably are not also. What I can say is that if you knew to reverse this early on in your course, it absolutely is reversible, probably up to the 7-year mark. After that, it becomes more problematic.
Well, I know Ken was able to reverse his diagnosis of type 2 within 2 months of cutting the sugar. He was back to, his A1C is like 5.2.
Well,
minus 6.8. It's gotten better. At the highest it was 11, and I've got it down to 6.2.
That's
But
great.
I still take metformin.
Right, and you should continue to take metformin. Metformin works by increasing that AMP kinase, by improving mitochondrial function.
Okay, that's
a
good
good thing for you to be taking.
Now, I was on 170 units of exogenous insulin, both long and short acting, when I decided to change my lifestyle. Within 2 weeks, I was off of all the insulin because I was having extreme lows.
Right.
But
So you're just on metformin now?
Just metformin. Did that insulin make me more insulin resistant, more diabetic?
Yes, absolutely. So insulin downregulates its own receptors. So the more insulin you take, the fewer receptors and the more insulin resistant you are. So by getting rid of the insulin, you've actually helped yourself because now you are more insulin sensitive, and the metformin has helped there too.
So I guess I'm doing I'm sorry, excuse me.
You don't want to stress your beta cells. Clearly, you are making some insulin because you are not your diabetes has improved so markedly, and your hemoglobin A1C is just above the criteria for diabetes at this point. That's a marvelous improvement. 77% of diabetics can reverse their diabetes. You may be in the 23%, where you haven't reversed it completely, but you are so much better.
So much better. I'm hoping, okay, that I guess my last question would be, is there any hope of beta cell rejuvenation?
Yeah, people are working on it. We're working on it here at UCSF. There's a lot of effort being put into that right now. It's not here yet, but people are working on it. People are looking at, beta cell ways to differentiate more beta cells, the different factors, what's his name? He won the Nobel Prize. He's here. What's his name? I've lost his name. My God, I know him like back of my hand. The protocol. He won. He's an orthopedist from Kyoto, but he works at UCSF also, and he won the Nobel Prize for determining how to take regular cells and turn them back into stem cells. So this is a very, very big.
So there's hope.
There is hope. We're not there yet. Let me wrap up here.
Okay, Ken wants to go ahead and wrap up, but I want to thank you very much for taking the time to answer my questions.
Oh, you are very welcome.
Thank you for this interview today. Really appreciate. Yes, Sydney.
In conclusion here, because I know you've been so generous with your time, I wanted to address the 4 C's that you brought up,
Yes.
because I think that is something that will help so many people looking how to break the addiction.
Right. So the goal is tamp down your dopamine, raise your serotonin, get your cortisol in control. That's the goal. Those 3 things. Low dopamine, high serotonin, low cortisol. There are 4 ways to do it, and they're all free.
The medical industry won't like that.
All free. All right. So money back guarantee, but since you didn't pay anything, don't expect a refund.
Okay.
All right. And I call them the 4 C's. All right. And they're all things your mother taught you, but you forgot. Number 1, connect. And connect does not mean through Facebook. Connect me, and not even like what we're doing right now, Ken.
Yeah.
Not through Zoom. Connect means eye to eye, face to face connection, which of course is difficult during a pandemic, to say the least. But nonetheless, this is why meeting places are important. This is what socialization is about. Turns out there are a group of neurons in the back of your head in the occipital lobe called mirror neurons. And those mirror neurons are reading the facial expressions of the person you are talking to in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And they are generating impulses based on those facial expressions, which gets translated into serotonin. And this is a process that we have a name for. It's called empathy. This is empathy. This is what empathy does.
Yeah.
And empathy is a driver of serotonin. Number 2, contribute. And that does not mean to your bank account. It means outside of yourself, to Habitat for Humanity, or to your local church, or to anywhere, but outside of yourself, giving rather than taking.
Yeah.
Remember, taking from a casino, giving to Habitat for Humanity. Okay? So contribute increases serotonin. Lottery winners are not happy.
Yep.
Across the board. Okay, it's not about the money. Number 3, cope. And cope means stress, mindfulness, exercise, and sleep. So, 23% of all adults are insomniacs.
Yeah.
Only 2.5% of the adult population can actually multitask. Everyone else is serially unitasking and raising their cortisol as they switch from task to task, making things worse.
Yeah.
All right. And exercise can actually reverse depression. It's just hard to get a depressed person to exercise. And finally, number 4, cook. There are 3 things about food that will tamp down dopamine, raise serotonin, and lower cortisol. One is tryptophan. Tryptophan is the amino acid precursor to serotonin. Tryptophan is the rarest amino acid in our entire diet. You find it in eggs and fish, and a little bit in poultry, but not too much in vegetables. So vegans are sort of tryptophan deficient.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, fructose, which lowers serotonin. It also raises dopamine, so it makes you think you're getting happy, but you're not. You're just receiving pleasure.
Yeah.
You're actually depleting serotonin. And finally, omega-3s. Omega-3s help serotonin neurotransmission. And so omega-3s, where do you get those? Again, wild fish, at least you have that in Guam, and flax. So real food, and that's what, generates happiness. Processed food does the opposite.
That is so true. When you stop and think about how many times a person can sit down there and eat, like I can eat maybe a baked potato or a steak, but I could sit down there and polish off a whole bag of Fritos.
Indeed.
And that's the difference between processed and unprocessed, real and ultra processed food.
Exactly right.
And so I would like to thank you for sharing with us today how we can use the definition of pleasure, pain, and the 4 C's to help break the addiction we all have to processed food. Because even though I've kicked the habit, I know that if I ever picked up another Frito again, I would be lost.
I understand.
But recognizing the difference between pleasure and happiness, and using the 4 C's and the mantra that came out in your book, protect the liver, feed the gut, has made a huge change. Because for me personally, I've lost 128 pounds, but the goal is not losing weight. It's about getting healthy. And just by making the lifestyle changes, I don't take a statin. I don't take diabetes drugs. I've cured my diverticulitis. I don't have irritable bowel syndrome. I don't have arthritis. I don't have plantar fasciitis, whatever the hell the foot thing. And those were all things that the current modern medicine was giving me prescriptions for, and berating me for not filling them.
Right.
All because I changed my food and changed my lifestyle.
Indeed. You cannot fix healthcare till you fix health. You cannot fix health until you fix diet. And you cannot fix diet until you know what's wrong.
So
now what's wrong.
Now, in the final production, I've got all your books. I'm going to be showing them because, like I said, these are the Human Body Owner's Manual. Now, if you own a human body, you need to get one of these 3 books or all 3 of these books. I strongly recommend it because the old Napoleon Hill, what the mind can conceive and believe, it will achieve. And those books help me and my wife do just that.
I am so pleased. That's why I wrote them. So that's the best endorsement I could possibly receive. I appreciate that.
So if you could share with our audience how they can follow you and tap into the wealth of information and advice you have put on your many forums.
So I have a website. It's robertlustig.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter and all those other places. The 3 books, Fat Chance, Hacking of the American Mind, and Metabolical. There's also a Fat Chance cookbook. Okay, 100 recipes, easy to make, 30 minutes or less, no added sugar, all kid-tested, kid-friendly, and all able to be made by the students at Mount Diablo High School. So if a high school student can do it, you can do it.
Oh my God, I forgot. I wanted to hit that point there. You talked about the way we change a generation or change the way we eat is you feed the kids, and that you do in your program.
Right.
And you feed their friends so that the adults can see that the kids will eat it, their friends will eat it. It tastes good to the adults. And this is the part that a lot of people don't understand. It's affordable.
Right.
Because even out here on a tropical island at the far end of the supply chain, we have changed our diet from processed food to real food. And with the decrease in appetite, because we're not, overloaded with processed food, real food is affordable. And I forgot to get that into the body of our talk.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. The fact of the matter is, real food is affordable. It's actually more affordable if you know what you're doing, but you have to know what you're doing.
And on that happy note, I want to thank Dr. Robert Lustig for sharing his time with us so generously, and his wealth of experience brought together over nearly 50 years of practical hands-on experience that he has shared with us, so that each one of us watching today can take steps to improve the quality of our life at the family level and at the community level. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me, Ken.
And we're out.
Okay.
Hold on there. That was the interview I had earlier today with Dr. Robert Lustig, and it was an amazing discussion we had, because as he pointed out, chronic diseases are uncurable with pills. And for those of us who have suffered with diabetes, sleep apnea, high blood pressure, all medicine does is treat the symptoms. It doesn't cure the pills. Now, when you work with your doctors, they will help you understand how you can incorporate, because all the doctors I know talk to their patients about making lifestyle changes, but the biggest challenge that the doctors have is the patients don't do it. Well, I'm putting out there that you have enough reason why to make these changes, because the quality of your life will dramatically improve as the quality of your health improves. And we'll be right back for our final words on this subject after this. There's an old Chinese proverb that a journey of 10,000 miles begins with the first step. The first step for you, if you're new to this way of thinking, is to learn as much information as you can. Now, these books are a great place to start, but there's other resources as well, because the more you learn about your body and the systems that operate within your body, the better partner you can be with your doctor. When you change your relationship with your doctor from one of patient-doctor to healthcare partners, that's when you're going to be able to make dramatic improvements in your health and quality of life. So until our next Keto Show, I'm Ken Leon-Guerrero, and thank you for spending time. I know it's been a long one, but it's well worthwhile. Share this video with your family and friends, and help fuel the ground-up movement to improve the food on our island. Thank you.